So here we are. This is session 1 of 6. Altogether, these sessions, are focused on how we learn. We're certainly hopeful, as Neil stated earlier, that you'll be able to join us for each of the sessions. They're 45 minutes each, so we'll be doing our best to move at a brisk pace, and also provide opportunities for folks to jump in. The series itself, just to kind of set it up as we start off here, really draws on three distinct but related sources. So the first two sources are really research-oriented sources. So we're talking about educational psychology and cognitive psychology in particular, where a lot of work has been done for many, many decades on looking at how learning, memory, knowledge, retrieval, all of these sorts of things work. I would say traditionally, a lot of that research was very oriented to young adults, usually students in psychology classrooms. But over time, it's shifted, and the real focus and a real significant shift in focus has taken place as folks look at K to 12 educational settings instead. And this is where there's a nice overlap with a lot of research that looks at what sorts of practices are particularly accessible, inclusive, and impactful in everyday classrooms. So that's the effective teaching research. So those are sorts of the two main research literatures that we're drawing on for this series. And it's really amplified and I would say synthesized in social networks like Twitter, and a whole series of educators who are blogging really actively about using these strategies in their classrooms. So we'll be engaging with all three of these and be sharing more information about them. But I just wanted to share that with you first. Um, I said this is sometimes called the science of learning. Really, I should have said this is often called the science of learning. So as we work through this series, if you want to jump in or jump ahead, you can literally just Google science of learning and you'll come across all sorts of related resources. So why have a series on how we learn? Well, there's a whole bunch of good reasons. We think that this is a good use of your time. First, all of us have personal and very kind of functional theories of what it means to learn and how we learn. This informs all of our teaching decisions when we're working with students as well. These kind of foundational factors of memory, thinking, processing, retrieval, and knowledge, they're always implicated in learning. It's hard to think. We're not going to take time to think this through, but I would say it's really difficult to think of an example where they're not implicated in kind of the teaching and learning exchange. As well, we thought this would be a really helpful series because we really wanted to share with you those networks or that ecosystem of folks out there who are applying these strategies in their classrooms. As well, there's a bit of an elephant in the room, maybe, maybe not, and that is we thought this was an important series because it seems to be a conversation that we haven't really made a lot of time for. The shift to the new curriculum was really important. It's opened up a lot of possibilities and a lot of conversations. They tend to be a little more oriented towards the bigger picture, which is really important. But at the same time, it's important for us to make space for these more foundational conversations. The most important reason, I would say for Neil and I for sure, that's kind of driving our thinking and bringing this series forward is because we think this would make a difference for students and we think it would make a difference for teachers. The more informed we are about how learning happens, the more able we are to meet the needs of our students. That said, here's a bit of a qualifier. We're focusing on, I used the word ecosystem before, it's an ecosystem of applied research that's pretty tightly bound, right? So I showed you those sources before. Now, the good thing is that these sources or resources that we're looking at are really scientifically based. And the nice thing about that is there's no real mystery about the claims that are being made. They're very evidence referenced, they're very explicit, and they're ones that are easy to dig into as we move ahead. At the same time, you know, a psychological approach to understanding how folks learn is but one perspective, right? So we would say that this is a perspective that is largely neglected and a lot of everyday efforts around supporting students and supporting teachers. So that's why we think it's important to engage with it. But at the same time, it's but one perspective, right? So we would invite you to engage with this critically and reflexively, and always to connect back to the bigger picture. Now, what's that bigger picture? Well, as a district, we've been engaging with a whole series of important perspectives over the past number of years, right? I mean, this is only a partial list. The thing about teaching is that you end up holding kind of the complexity of a lot of different perspectives, and then you end up drawing on those really strategically as you move forward. So what we see is that the information that we're going to be sharing with you should help to underpin and inform your engagement with what you see in front of you on the screen. But at the same time, it might also prompt you to kind of rethink some of your assumptions about learning too. So let's consider these connections and implications together as we move forward in the series. So just a few tips for engagement. Apply this content to your context. You know, we would definitely invite you to take some of these ideas and some of these strategies for a sprint. What you're going to find, to be just completely transparent, is that this first session is a little bit more of laying the groundwork. It might feel just a little bit more theoretical than practical, whereas our subsequent sessions will have all sorts of real practical tools and strategies that would really lend themselves to a trial in a classroom. So applying content to your context is obviously very important as well. Would really invite you to ask questions and seek clarification. Our commitment to you, to put it really simply, is to be really explicit. We're not sharing with you, you know, the A to Z of how learning happens, but we are sharing with you consensus points that we think would be really valuable. And what we'll do as we share those with you is be really clear about where they're coming from, so that you can dig in deeper. Now, just a friendly reminder, for all new learning, we're always having to navigate biases, right? I mean, there's a built-in tendency for all of us to kind of stick with the status quo. This is, you know, probably there's all sorts of really great evolutionary reasons for that. But at the same time, when we can take a step back and recognize that there's that kind of innate orientation to maybe stick with the status quo, then we have a chance to move beyond it too, right? And this is actually, you know, kind of an exercise that comes out of cognitive science. So we just want to just a reminder, right? To, as you're thinking reflexively and critically, do keep an eye out for these sorts of things, right? Confirmation bias is probably the most widely known bias, I think. You know, just that tendency to notice or focus on what you already know and to look for evidence that backs that up. But the other three here, bandwagon effect, base rate fallacy, and a sunk cost fallacy, I think these can be significant as well. What I won't do is I won't read through all of them right now. I would just encourage you to have an open mind and to think critically as we move ahead here together. This was a slide that we had actually debated on whether or not including in this session or a subsequent session. It's actually really, I think it's quite provocative. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of John Hattie. He is an educational researcher who's quite well known for recent work that he's done around meta-analysis and sort of synthesizing, what works in education. He's a bit of a contentious figure. I would say you know, there's all sorts of debates about some of his really specific claims. But one thing that there isn't really very much debate on, I would argue, is a consensus point, is this idea that there's good news in education, and the good news is almost everything we choose to do with students positively impacts student learning. So that's great. But there's a nuance to that, and it's a bit of bad news, and that is not everything works as well. So much of it makes a positive impact, but it's a differential impact. And there's a cost of lost opportunities there for our most vulnerable learners. So that's why it's always on us to have these sorts of critical shared conversations, so we can always think through what our options are, so we can make the best strategic decisions for our students.